Oh my gosh, Jeff Beck, Guitar Shop on KFUG, Crescent City. You know, sometimes it's better to be lucky than good, right? Because that really wasn't the song I was going to play, but I did, and it worked out just fine. Terry Bozio and Jeff Beck, Guitar Shop. Good stuff. On your community radio station, KFUG, Crescent City, 101.1 on your FM radio dial, worldwide on the internet, kfugradio.org. I'm your host, Mike Thornton. This is KFUG's Public Process. 8 minutes past the top of the hour. That hour is noon, in case you need to know that. I'm very pleased to be joined in our studio by Felice Pace, who has been a long time forest and river activist in our region, particularly around the Klamath and Smith Rivers, which we're going to be focusing on today. And Felice is also very much involved. Is it the water chair of the Sierra Club?
The water chair of the local group, which is the North Group, which is part of the Redwood chapter of the Sierra Club. The Sierra Club, of course, I need to say, is the only democratic, major environmental group. We elect our board of directors. Most environmental groups, they appoint them. So that's part of why I work through the Sierra Club. But I'm just a local chair, water chair.
Well, yeah, you're a local chair who's doing an awful lot. Felice, let me encourage you to bring that mic a little bit closer to you, so that way we can hear you.
Yeah, how's that?
That's good. Thank you very much. So one of the things that I've been really interested in, and more so as of late, is the whole issue around Klamath dams, and you provided me some information, and I really appreciate it because it's a much more complex thing than I had thought. Now I understand it's 4 dams that are talking about being removed. Can you give us some history about the situation with the dams, where we were at, how we got to where we are now, and from your perspective, what are some of the pros and cons of all of that? Because I think it's something that probably most of us really don't fully understand.
Sure, I'll do my best, and I'm sure you'll ask some follow-up questions if I don't cover stuff.
I'll try.
But the Klamath Hydroelectric Project is owned by Pacificor. It's the same people that in this area give us our electric, and some of that electricity is made in those dams. They go back. Pacificor didn't always own them. The first dam of the series was built in the early 1900s up in southern Oregon, just over the border. So they spanned the border. And then the last one in the 60s was because fishermen were getting killed, because the only way they make money generating electricity on these dams is to ramp up the water, as ramping is the technical term for it. It's to save up some water and then use it when electricity is worth a little more money on the wholesale market, which is in the evening, as it turns out. Anyway, they built Iron Gate, the last dam, to keep to re-regulate the river so that the whole river wasn't going up and down radically. Which they just did between the dams then. But anyway, like all dams are under federal law. They're licensed by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and it's generally a 50-year license. And the license for the Klamath dams came up, and the term passed a number of years ago. So they started, and this goes back maybe now 15 years or so, where they started the hearings about relicensing the dams. Now, the federal tribes in the Klamath River Basin, and particularly the lower Klamath tribes, the 3 big tribes, the Kuduk tribe on the mid-Klamath, the Yurok tribe on the lower Klamath, and the Hoopa tribe that is mostly on the lower Trinity but comes over in the Hoopa Square. Their reservation touches the Klamath as well. Okay. And these tribes, which, except for the Hoopa, weren't even organized when these dams were first licensed, didn't have tribal governments. They put their biologists into this process of dam relicensing, and it's really the tribal fisheries biologists who are and the tribes, who are largely responsible for why those dams are coming out. And what they did is they pushed for fish ladders, and once it became clear, an administrative law judge made a decision that the company, if they relicensed those dams, was going to have to put in fish ladders to get the fish back to the upper basin. Then those dams became a money loser. And the California Energy Commission estimated that they would lose at least $20 million a year, because in addition, they weren't going to be able to ramp up the water as much as they had been, and so those dams were already, from an economic standpoint, marginal in terms of profits. So we're talking about a private company. As soon as it became clear to them that in order to relicense these dams, they were going to have to spend a lot of money, and that wasn't even counting what they would have had to spend for water quality, and lose money on them, they wanted to get rid of them. So they cut what is essentially a sweetheart deal for the 1%, which is a big corporation, whereby the taxpayers in California, and you and I are a couple of those, we get to pay $25 million of the cost of taking out the dams. Actually, 4 of the dams in the Klamath project. There's actually 6 dams. I'll talk about the other ones later. But these 4 lower dams, that's pretty good, because that means the ratepayers, who's also you and I.
That's right.
We get to pay the rest of it because they've been collecting money out of our water bills, and the Public Utilities Commission has authorized this in order to pay for decommissioning these dams. So what that deal does is it means that their stockholders don't have to pay anything.
And we're talking about Pacificor, right?
Pacificor. And Pacificor's stockholders, and one of the major ones is a guy named, that has Berkshire Hathaway. What's that fellow's name? Warren Buffett.
Right. Oh, Warren Buffett.
Yeah, Warren Buffett bought into Pacificor because it's actually a really good company, over-invested in coal, which they're having to get out of. But actually it's a pretty good deal they cut for the company. And the tribes, and generally the fishing communities and all that like it because, well, it's going to get 4 dams out. Now, it's important to understand that those dams do not control floodwaters. The actual flows in the Klamath River coming from the upper basin are controlled by the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation that has a big irrigation project up there. So they only let so much. When there's too much water, they shun it over into what used to be Lower Klamath Lake, into some ag lands, and that's the way we do flood control in this basin. The dams have very little of what's called active storage that you can lower and raise. They don't have an outlet at the bottom, in other words, so they can do very little in terms of flood control, something that's very misunderstood. And they also don't do any irrigation. There's no irrigation water that comes out of them. All those dams do is hydroelectric.
Okay.
That's it. They generate power. That's their sole function. So the dams are going to come out because it's good for the company. But the people that live around the reservoirs and those reservoirs, and other people in Siskiyou County, including some of the people that live along the Klamath River up there in Siskiyou County, they're very opposed to losing what they call our dams. And it's very interesting because Siskiyou County, where I lived for 35, 40 years, is a very right-wing kind of Trump country kind of county. And property rights, they were big in the property rights wise use movement, and they're big for property rights and up there. But when it comes to Pacificor's property rights, they don't think that Pacificor can do whatever they want with the dams. They think they're their dams.
So all of a sudden, free enterprise isn't as good as it's cracked up to be.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, they're humans, and humans are great at rationalizing our own self-interest, or as we see our own self-interest to be the public interest as well. So ask me some questions about it.
Well, I want to remind our listeners that we're talking with Felice Pace of the Redwood chapter of the Sierra Club, and we're talking about issues related to water in our region, particularly now around the Klamath River, and we'll also be talking about issues in the Smith River as well. You are tuned to KFUG, Crescent City, 101.1, and kfugradio.org. This is Public Process. I'm Mike Thornton. So, Felice, so one of the things I was reading is this is actually the biggest dam removal project in the country. Is that correct?
Well, they claim that it's the biggest dam removal, so far anywhere.
Okay.
And I don't know how to verify that. Maybe it is. They're actually not. These dams are not all that big, but there's 4 of them that are going to get taken out. So it's a pretty big project, and that's great. It doesn't. The important thing is it will help the river, but the other thing that is a danger is it's been promoted as something that's going to fix the river, and it is not going to fix the river. And here's why: the sickness of the Klamath River is basically due to poor water quality. And that poor water quality is overwhelmingly related to irrigated agriculture in the upper basin above the dams, mostly in Oregon, but also the Tule Lake Basin in California and lower Klamath area, and the Shasta and Scott Valleys, the irrigated agriculture and animal agriculture in those valleys. So our river has excessive nutrients, the temperatures are too high, and it has other problems, dissolved oxygen. Now, those problems are exacerbated by the dams, which also produce toxic algae. But the dams that are going to be left up in place in Oregon also have toxic algae, so we're still going to have a toxic algae problem after they come out. And we're still going to have a water quality problem as well because of those agricultural discharges. It is going to get a little better because the dams make bad water quality worse.
Right. Well, and that was one of the things that I wanted to ask you about, because it sounds like it's more complicated than is being presented in general, because at least some of what I've heard is that, well, this will improve the flows in the river, which will lower the temperature in the river, which will help to combat the algae that forms because the water gets too warm behind the dams. And so all of this will be beneficial. It sounds like it will do some of that, but at the same time, there's this whole issue with ag runoff that is not being addressed. Is that what you're saying?
Well, it will not improve the flows because the flows are controlled by the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation.
Okay.
And their big storage is Upper Klamath Lake. And the earlier in the season that they can fill Upper Klamath Lake, and the more they can fill it, the more irrigation they can do, and that's their priority. It's going to continue to be their priority. So we have biological opinions that give us some of the flows, and we'll still have those. Now, there might be some slight improvement in flows because of the part of the river in the Cascade Canyon that's opened up and the tributaries that come up in there. But in general, the flows, water quality is going to get a little better. Flows might be a little better, but they're still controlled by the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation primarily. So this poor water quality and conditions below the dams in terms of the bed of the river are the reason in some recent drought years we've lost 90%, an estimated 90% of the juvenile salmon died before they came out of all the watersheds into the Klamath River, and then they died before they could get to the ocean, 90% of the fish. And that's basically due to water quality and the embedded nature. I mean, it's kind of complex because there's parasites and hosts and all this kind of stuff. But basically, taking out the dams is going to improve that condition some. but it's not going to solve our problem because we still have the fifth dam, Keno Reservoir, and the sixth dam in Upper Klamath Lake, and toxic algae and lots of water pollution from agriculture that's going to flow into our river from them. So what we really need to do is we really need the North Coast Water Board, where I do a lot of work, that's supposed to protect our rivers and keep our streams swimmable and fishable, and not where if you get in it you're going to get a rash or get sick because of toxic algae, or have your dog die because your dog drinks the toxic water in the river. We really need them to enforce the Clean Water Act, and that can clean up our water. Because right now, agriculture in every river basin in California is the main polluter, the main reason why our rivers and estuaries are not swimmable and fishable and even drinkable, they could be in some cases, is because we have not really cleaned up agricultural pollution.
We're talking with Felice Pace of the Sierra Club Redwood chapter about water issues here in our region. So Felice, I want to get back to this issue related to the water board, because that's going to, I think, be our bridge on some level between Klamath and Smith River, I think. Yep. But let's go back if we can. So I have a past life doing some work for some environmental organizations, and one of them was around legacy mining toxins. And this was in the Sierra Nevada foothills, where a lot of those toxins were built up behind a number of dams that are there. Is that an issue on the Klamath?
It's not really an issue on the Klamath, and here's why. The upper basin is volcanic. Okay. And volcanic areas don't have gold, so we didn't have the mercury pollution and that kind of stuff. Now, there are some naturally, there's some waters in the upper basin that are naturally high in some metals, but it's really not a problem. And then in terms of sediments, the only sediments that collected behind those dams came out of the Cascade Canyon, because there's two dams up above where the dams that are going to be coming out are. So there's relatively little amount of sediment behind those dams. In fact, there's less than comes down off our forest roads. I mean, we have 8,000 miles of dirt and gravel roads on the Klamath National Forest alone. In the Klamath Basin, we probably have 4 times that much, like 30,000 acres or so, including the private land, roads, and all that. And those dirt roads in a storm, in a heavy duty storm or a storm event, will put out a lot more sediment than is going to come from behind those dams. Now, and they've tested the sediments. There are some low levels of the chemicals. I can't remember which ones, some chemicals we usually find. But what the modeling has shown, and I think, and also experience with other dams that have now come out because we're getting experience with them, is that sediment is going to flush out immediately. There was a concern that it might come up and affect the harbor up in Crescent City. No, it's the modeling, and it's not that much. And in fact, the fishermen say that there's a big hole that needs sediment in the Klamath. The Klamath is sort of sediment starved because it has these big dams that have been blocking sediment for a while. So, I'm losing track now. Where are we headed?
Well, where we're headed is I wanted to get to the issue of sediment, and particularly as it pertains to the harbor here, because once again, my limited understanding of this topic is that was the argument that some of our elected officials were raising about why the removal of the dams might be problematic, because it would have this sediment effect in the Crescent City Harbor. But it sounds like you're saying that's really not an issue. Yeah,
well, let's go back to 2005. In 2005, the people that are raising that were around here then. I was too. And the Klamath, it was a big storm. We had a big storm, 3-day storm in 2005. We had a lot of sediment come down the Klamath, a lot more than is going to come out of those dams. Did it affect the harbor at all? I never saw anything that it affected the harbor. So I just don't see it happening. I think it may have been something that people who are philosophically opposed to dam removal kind of saw something. Oh, here's something we can latch onto.
When you say philosophically approved to dam removal, what does that mean?
Well,
to
I
you?
think that this is the dams are symbolic in a way. I think the reason, thinking about people I've known, right wingers and non-right wingers, but people that love the dams up in Siskiyou County who are my friends. I've known for many years, and they love the dams. The dams to them represent progress, represent American civilization at its best. That's the way dams were sold to the American people, starting, with Hoover Dam and all those big dam building era. This is progress. This is the height of civilization. So to them, it means we're tearing down their civilization. I think it's the same kind of thing that fuels dam opposition to dam removal is what fuels Trump's base, President Trump's base. It's like we're losing it. We're losing our white Anglo-Saxon progressives, progress first industrial society.
Right. No, and I'm really interested that you brought that up, because I wanted to ask, and this may or may not be an appropriate question. I'll ask, you can answer it or not. How much of the opposition to this is somewhat tied into, well, the tribes will benefit somehow, that there will be some opportunity for resurgence of tribal economics and tribal culture and tribal religion. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And can you speak to that at all? Do you have thoughts on it?
Yeah, I do have some thoughts on that, because when I came to Siskiyou County first, to the Scott River Basin in 1976, because I wanted to live near the wilderness, and there's all those wilderness areas. And but I didn't know there were still Indian people around, and I kind of just fell in with them, and worked with the Native Americans for a number of years. As you probably know, at one point I was social service director for the Yurok tribe.
Yes.
I was also at some point social service director for the Kuduk tribe. At that time, Native Americans, the tribes were not organized. The Quartz Valley Indian Reservation up there in Scott Valley had been terminated illegally, as it turned out. It's now reinstated and thriving. But the tribal people were invisible, basically, in the society, except in the police reports, as it turns out. But that's changed, and I'm sure, I don't know anybody that is, I haven't encountered that kind of racism directly, but I'm not Native American, I'm Italian American. So even though I hang out with the natives some, I don't know how much it's there. I wouldn't be surprised, because, we have that a long history here. But it does seem like on the North Coast, attitudes, at least in Del Norte County too, in Humboldt County, and in some parts of Siskiyou, particularly the river parts, I think the attitudes are changing on that. I think racism, overt racism, is definitely less evident, but I think even that kind of silent part of it. So I think the opposition is less opposition to the tribes, although that element may be there, and more just opposition to these environmentalists and people that want to knock down progress.
Right. Yeah. And the reason I asked is because we were talking, sort of about that Trump kind of base where, and once again, I'm paraphrasing what I thought I heard you say, is that there's this, well, if they're gaining, we must be losing.
Yeah.
And we can't lose, because, that's against all that is good and holy if somehow or another someone else is gaining and then we're losing something, or we perceive that we're losing something.
And I think this is a good topic, and I'd suggest you might want to come back to it with some Native American people.
I would love to do that.
Including some people from upriver, like from the Kuduk tribe from Orleans area and stuff, where they deal more with Siskiyou County. But of course, the officials of all the 3 lower basin tribes deal with those folks up there. Yeah.
We're speaking with Felice Pace of the Redwood chapter of the Sierra Club, and we're talking about water issues in our region, particularly along the Klamath. My name is Mike Thornton. This is Public Process. You are tuned to KFUG Crescent City, 101.1 on your radio dial worldwide, on the internet at kfugradio.org. And let me also take this opportunity to remind you that these interviews are all recorded and are going up on KFUG's website. So if there's something that you heard or something you say, wait a minute, what did he say? You'll be able to go back and actually listen to those. Our first 2 interviews from our first program are up there. That is Crescent City Police Chief Ivan Minsel and editor of the Triplicate newspaper, Robin Fornoff. But today we're joined by Felice Pace talking about river and water issues here in our area. We were talking about the water board, which I'd like to use as a way to travel geographically north, if we can, from the Klamath to the Smith River, because my understanding in my short period of time living in this community, there are real issues on the Smith. And for the most part, there seems to be a real reticence to address them, to even talk about them in many respects. Can you speak about the Smith River? Because I know you're very active in that.
Well, the Smith River, of course, we have, and most of the listeners will know, we've got the National Recreation Area, most of the basin. It's the only totally undammed river in California, the Smith River. And it's an outstanding water. And most of it's national forest. And, I don't know, a couple of decades ago, we made it a National Recreation Area. So we don't have the kind of logging and road building that would destroy the river. But down in the estuary area, we've got a lot of agriculture. And there's really 2 kinds of agriculture in the estuary area. One is there's animal agriculture, both dairies and beef production, but dairies primarily are the big ones. And there's lily bulb growing. And some of the fields are in southern Oregon, but basically they call the north part, the lands adjacent to the north part of the estuary, they call that the Smith River Plain. And that would be what 101 goes through once it crosses the Smith River going north, past the town of Smith River and so forth. And if you look out your window, you'll see that there's these fields, row crop, where there's some kind of row crop. Those are lily bulbs. Now, lily bulbs have to stay in the ground for 3 years in order to get to that point where they market them, where they can be forced for your Easter lilies on the church or wherever in your home. And so that means if you're going to keep a bulb in for 3 years, you're going to have to deal with nematodes, with soil organisms that are going to get in those bulbs. And if those get in there, they can't sell them. So they use more pesticides than anywhere else in California, both to control weeds, as they do normal, in a lot of agriculture, but also for these soil organisms. And particularly these soil fumigants that they use in the fall are some of the things they used to use are banned, but some of those chemicals, including 1,2,3-TCP, a solvent that used to be in the pesticides, actually a degreaser kind of solvent that is banned now, but it's in the water, and it's in the water sometimes in concentrations that are not healthy for people. And some of the people are drinking that water. We have the Reservation Ranch Dairy has a public water system with 20 hookups, and mostly workers drink that water. And of course, we have the town of Smith River, but also the town of Smith River Community Service District was put in after there were a lot of problems with people getting cancer from the groundwater up there. But it doesn't cover the whole area, so we also have private wells that are risky.
Well, and one of the things that I've come to learn about the lily bulb farming in particular is that, I mean, it's a sort of commercial-driven thing for what we think of as these sort of traditional lilies, right? You can actually grow lilies that don't have to be in the ground for 3 years, but that's a different business model and a different product. And so I guess one of the things that I'd like us to get to after a short break is to talk a little bit more about, you know, the impact that this type of farming, because it really sounds like the broader, bigger issue, global issue, is ag production. And then we have some specific types of ag production in our region. And then perhaps talk about what could be done about this. And we'll be back to talk about that in just a couple of minutes.
Hey, it's a good morning.
Okay, Paul, thanks for having me over.
Great. Thanks for having me,
It's
Paul.
good morning, Paul.
Friday mornings at 10. Tune into KFUG 101.1 FM, KFUGradio.org online for me, Just Paul, and community service. 3 hours of local talk, interviews, and insight. Oh, and great music. Get in touch, be involved, and get in tune to KFUG Fridays at 10 a.m. for a socially relevant dose of community service with me, Just Paul. Today's broadcast is underwritten in part by Green Bicycles, makers of Happy Endings Tea Mix and Ocean Bounty Flour Mix, locally produced, clean green certified plant nutrients. Whether your grow is small or large, indoor or out, Green Bicycle's all-natural, sustainable plant nutrients help ensure your crop's quality from strong roots to fragrant flowers. Green Bicycles, because those in the know. Check out Green Bicycles on Facebook or at greenbicycles.com. That's GREAN, bicycles.com. The future of agriculture, right here in Crescent City. Green Bicycles, another proud underwriter of your community radio station.
Well, there we go. We managed to do an underwriter about ag, and we are joined in the studio by Josh Norris, who works for the planning department of the Yurok tribe. Josh, thank you for getting here. I mean, you managed to find the super secret KFUG bunker. Now you know where it is. Let me get you to move a little bit closer to that mic, and so that way we can find out if we've got you. Yep. So we were talking about Klamath issues, and we were just moving on to Smith River. But I'd like to give you an opportunity, since you did find the bunker, to actually be able to have something to say about this. Just some thoughts, because I know we had communicated about an editorial that had been in the paper about it.
Well, I'll keep it brief. I was just, I'm a little surprised yet that people are still going back and forth on this issue. And what I'm realizing is that people still are thinking about dam removal in terms of these sort of myths that go with dams, and just not fully understanding the issue, because otherwise I think it would be a no-brainer for folks in this area. I started working on this issue back in 2005, when Pacific Corps was first working on getting the dams relicensed by the Federal Energy Regulation Committee, FERC. And they kept getting delays. And they were doing that because they were just delaying the inevitable cost of either upgrading the dams so that for fish passage for endangered species, for the endangered Chinook salmon, or removing the dams. So they were able to put it off for as long as possible, and finally, realizing that it would be actually cheaper to remove the dams. Right. And then this is. It was a lengthy process, a lot of folks involved, a lot of government involved, but ultimately what people determined was just the cost of the dams wasn't worth keeping them in. And all the players pretty much agree that these are out of date. So I think that the reason that folks are still sort of, why there's still controversy out there about dams is they don't fully understand the science behind the dams. So I think there are a couple of misconceptions that I've heard floated about, even by some of our city council and county board of supervisors. One of those myths is that these dams provide flood insurance and that they store water so that, I'm not sure what fire management has to do with it, but I've heard that. I've also heard that from our president in addressing California's wildfire crisis. But the truth is, they don't provide any assurance. They don't. Their function is not to store water.
Right.
Their function is to spin turbines, and you can do the same thing by essentially taking turbines and putting them in the river. In fact, there's an invention out there. You can power your town basically just by putting a turbine in there, and there's not even a need for a dam. Okay. And the amount of water that is behind them is not like these big lakes that are often associated with dams. It's actually a relatively small amount of water, and so therefore it's not going to provide any sort of flood insurance or water storage for any length of time.
And the other misconceptions?
The other misconceptions, I think that there's also, I've heard this one thrown about that, they always want to pit the tribes against against agriculture, and it's a popular trope for
people who want to use popular tropes.
Well, how it works is, yes, it's just this. It's a really simplistic argument that you have two choices. One, you can provide water for farmers, and two, you can provide water for fish, which feeds people, primarily native peoples.
Right.
And that's just another misconception. These dams do not provide irrigation to farmers at all. That's not their function either. And so if you remove them, there will still be irrigation. And I'm going to say, unfortunately, for the fish, but yes, there is still irrigation. So it's not going to affect the farmers in any way whatsoever.
We are now speaking with Josh Norris of the Yurok Tribal Planning Department, and we're still joined in studio by Felice Pace of the Redwood chapter of the Sierra Club. And Felice, we were discussing on the Smith River, we were talking about issues around pesticide and ag contamination there. It sounds like the global issue when it comes to water contamination in our state is ag. We talked about the Water Quality Board. What can be done about trying to address these issues so we can, to the degree it's possible, protect the health of the river, protect the health of the water, protect the health of the people, protect the health of the fish, not bankrupt a already poor county? How do we balance that?
Well, it's actually quite possible in my view, and there's two aspects of it. One is water quantity, and the other is water quality. Water quantity, and both of them, and they're related, because if you take more water out, then you're going to have more concentrated pollution. And the classic answer to pollution is dilution.
Right, dilution is the solution.
Dilution is the solution to pollution. That's the old saw. Right. But in terms of quantity, all over, and this is true of every major river system in the West, is 70 to 90% of the water is consumed that's diverted is consumed by agriculture. And then it's also true where we've done the studies of rivers, it's always come out, these in-stream flow studies, that in order to have a healthy river, you need basically 40 to 60% of the flow to stay in the river. And you need to follow the natural hydrograph. You need to have some high flows in wintertime, just like nature. So you're simulating nature. But a river can get by with, 40, 50% of the flow. The problem is, we've developed these river systems to take 70 to 90%. And now we're fighting to get some of that water back into our dewatered rivers. So this remains an issue on the Klamath. As Josh pointed out, it's not related to the dams. It's going to be there after the dams, and it's mainly the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation in the upper basin and some private irrigation up there and private irrigation in the Shasta and the Scott. And groundwater the exploitation of groundwater by agriculture has exacerbated the flow problems. So now we've got a dewatered Scott River, for example, should be one of the breadbaskets in terms of producing salmon. And it is when there's enough water. Yeah. It produces a lot of salmon. But in even average water years now, it's iffy whether we can get those fish to the spawning grounds because of irrigation, dewatering, and groundwater extraction, dewatering these rivers. So that's the flow problem, and the water boards have a role in that because of water rights and the public trust. The state water board with water rights, people can have water rights, but they're not supposed to damage the public trust in those rivers. And the public trust goes back to my ancestors in Italy, the Emperor Justinian. And Justinian's code said the air and the water and the shores of the rivers and the sea, those belong to everybody and nobody can own them. And so that's the public trust, and the fish are a public trust resources. Our swimming holes are public trust resources, and they've been destroyed too by this over-exploitation of water. So we really have to allocate some of that water back, and the water boards can do that with the public trust. The regional water boards under the state board are responsible for the water quality, and they have been, just like officials all over the country, they have been reticent to really regulate agriculture. We've eliminated, to a large extent, industrial pollution out of the pipes coming from factories and things like that. We've dealt with our own waste in terms of wastewater systems and our community sewage systems, but we haven't dealt with the non-point pollution from agriculture and in a lot of places from forestry too.
Well, let me ask both of you in the 5 minutes or so we have left here, what is it that people in this community who care about these issues, whether it be Klamath and dams and fish on the Klamath, or where I know that's a really big package, as is if we're talking about the Smith. I mean, these are really big, multifaceted, multi-layered issues. But what can the average person who lives in these communities do to impact these situations so they are more positive, so the outcomes are more along the lines of what I think many of us would like them to be?
You want to go?
Well, I'd say the first thing is get involved. There are organizations around that support these issues and show up to hearings, show up to board meetings. So find a local organization that supports the values that you share, and join up and participate.
Well, here's the thing. Up here since we're in Crescent City and Del Norte County, one of the things is, in terms of agricultural pollution and pesticides and things, is you're not supposed to spray. It's actually against the law to spray when the wind's blowing hard. But you see it out there. So people can take pictures. They need to demand. And we've actually had an agricultural commissioner leave here under circumstances where he may have been asked to actually falsify some of the records or the reports, but the county's supposed to be monitoring the air speed and not allowing them to spray. That's something people can do just by calling their supervisor, and complaining if it spray's going on while the air's blowing.
I want to stop you because I just want to be clear on what I thought I heard you say. You talked about falsification of reports.
Well, I can't make an accusation at this point, but it's something that needs to be looked into. We had a young agricultural commissioner come here and replace a guy who had been here for years and years, and then he left in a short period of time. And I've heard some rumors about that, about that he may have left because he was not willing to sign certain reports that had to go to the state. I'm planning to look in to that, and I mention it here mainly. I intended to mention it because there may be listeners out there who know something about this and who can get in touch through K or call me up 707-954-6588.
We'll give that number again before we get out of here. I know we don't have time I got to have both of you guys back at some point because there's a lot more to talk about this, and one of them is to the degree, since agriculture can be a problem, what about marijuana agriculture adding to this mix?
Okay, well, I'll speak to that. I mean, on behalf of the Yurok tribe, we have a zero tolerance policy, and we've actually extended that onto our entire ancestral territory. So folks who are, we're getting permits from folks to grow legally within our ancestral territory, and we're reviewing each case, making sure that it's not going to be interfering with cultural resources or natural resources. I wish that we looked at all types of agriculture in the same way, because they all have similar effects. Although I'd have to say the illegal grows, which are still prevalent, are some of the worst cases you might see, just because of the level of toxins that they use and the blight and then just diverting entire streams.
Yeah, marijuana can be a problem particularly in these small streams. But all agriculture, what I want to leave with is agriculture. It's easy to keep, animal manure out of a creek. You just put up a fence and have a little. Even if you're irrigating, you have a little filter strip. There's ways. Agriculture mainly operates on flat ground. And even when it's not on flat ground, there's ways to control and deal with the pollution. It's just they haven't been willing to do it. Now, the water allocation problem is more basic. There we have, to reallocate some water. If we want to have living streams, we're going to have to reallocate some water. But even there's tremendous opportunity to do more with less in agriculture in terms of efficiency of using water.
We've been joined by Felice Pace of the Redwood chapter of the Sierra Club and Josh Norris with the planning department for the Yurok tribe. Gentlemen, I hope you will be willing to come back again, because I know there's a lot more to be talked about on all of these issues. But any contact information that you might like to give out, now would be the time to do it.
Well, sure. Anytime people see pollution, you can report it to the agencies. Cal EPA, by the way, has online complaint reporting for any kind of environmental complaint. You can do it right online at Cal EPA complaint. Do a search on that and you'll find it. But if you want to get in touch with me, I'll just give my telephone number again, which is 707-954-6588. Be happy to take your call anytime.
And give it one more time for everybody who was reaching to grab a pen when you said 707.
707-954-6588.
Felice Pace, Josh Norris, did you want to give out any contact information?
Sure, you can reach me at the Yurok tribe. It's 707-482-1350, and I'm in extension 1407. You can email me at jnorris at urottribe.nsn.gov.
Thank you both very much for joining us on KFUG's Public Process, and I sincerely hope that you'll be willing to come back and talk more about these issues.